causing a lot of flooding. And then in some other parts of the same region, we're having a lot of droughts. Coming from Kenya, we are actually experiencing the worst drought in 40 years. And yet, the same part of the country, they're also receiving a lot of rain. So we have really a situation where, on one hand, we have a lot of rain, then on the other hand, we have extreme drought. And that what really means is that the planning situation is extremely complex because it means you really have to have a very dynamic policy system. Otherwise, just an overarching one policy at national level may not really suffice in terms of how dynamic the situation is getting around rainfall in East Africa. Next slide. For Southern Africa, where we are, I think some of my colleagues have alluded to that in terms of what we're experiencing. We have drought, we have rainfall, a lot of rainfall. We have tropical cyclones which we are experiencing, and people talked about Mozambique and Freddy, just to mention that it has also reached my own country, Malawi, and a lot of damage has happened there. Again, we've seen changes in liver discharge. And that has also affected agricultural activities that will be happening around those rivers, but also in terms of the other sectors that depend on water, such as energy. And you can see that the fluctuations around water is actually huge, actually between 50%, either below or up. And that is actually very disturbing when it comes to how it can inform policy. Because if maybe the fluctuations are minimal, then you can see how you can juggle around policy. But when you have those kind of huge variations, then it also kind of complicates policy making in a way. Next slide. In West Africa, again, we've seen that there's actually rainfall and liver discharge variability, again, within the region of 50% above or below historical levels. And this is, again, because of declining rainfall, increasing temperature, but also causing drought frequency and increasing water demand because of populations. But what also this means is that this water is actually being experienced across different sectors that depend on water. And usually it is agriculture, as you may have heard, that consumes a lot of that. But also there are other competing sectors in West Africa, such as hydropower and tourism, that depend on that also suffer this water situation in that region. Next. North Africa, and thank you, my brother from Egypt, for coming. Again, we're seeing a situation there where I think the issue around Nile is actually very much under threat because of changing climate. And there we're seeing that some of the eastern Nile region, where they're depending on irrigation, because of changing climate, you could actually see a reduction in revenue in the region of 34% in times when it is very dry, but also 11% when there's a bit of rainfall. Again, that talks a lot in terms of the economy of that region, but also in terms of how a government needs to be responding to that situation. Again, we're looking at issues to do with variability in future, which could lead up to around 5 to 25% reduction in river discharge in the upper part of Nile. And all those, I think, they have implications around irrigation that is happening around those areas, but also in terms of the other sectors that depend on that, particularly electricity generation in that sense. Next. Central Africa, again, we're seeing that at 1.5 degrees surface temperature, we see that there's low confidence in projected changes in average rainfall, and therefore we would continue to see extreme rainfall in that region, therefore causing flooding and also a lot of mature monsoon season. Again, we noticed that droughts are also going to be accompanied by those temperature or climate scenarios. And by and large, it also means that the policy situation there would have to be dynamic to respond to this kind of changes in the climate in the Central Africa region. Next. Now, because I think of this, we've noted that I think the international financing institutions have actually been putting a lot of money into agriculture. And that money has been quite a lot. And just to agree that agriculture, again, in this case, takes agriculture water investment takes a lot of that. And in the report from OECD is actually showing that 27% of the international finance institutions investment has actually gone into water. So 27% of all that most of the international financing institutions are investing are going into water. And others, for example, when you look at agricultural policy and administration, is only 16%, not a small amount. But just to agree that I think this is becoming a policy concern, and this is why all these institutions are responding in that sense. Next. Again, on international financing, you see a trajectory where funding for water is actually continuing, is increasing. And the of interest is really the fact that there's been quite a lot of international frameworks that have enabled increased investment in water, and particularly into water for agriculture. I think closer to us, it would be good to look at the CADIP in the sense that one of the most underperforming indicators is actually being water for agriculture. And this was actually, again, just included, I think, around 2011, 2012 or 2013 into the matrix of indicators, and yet it is also underperforming. So I think one of the things that we might want to do at national level is how to ensure that water for agriculture is heavily invested in. Yes, I also understand that we may have to define what is water for agriculture, because again, that again is something that is everywhere, but it is also nowhere sometimes. Next. Yeah, now, when you look at some of the issues that have rocked the water governance in Africa, I think one is the climate variability, as I said, and the challenge really is how to align water management with unprecedented changes in climate because of these variations that I talked about. And I think that's a big challenge, because in one country, you may have to deal, like I said, with excess water availability. Maybe in the other part of the country, you may have to deal with drought. And how do you really manage that? The other challenge is the multiplicity of actors and agencies that deal with water, all of them with deep interest. And in the end, really, you find that the lines of accountability are affected in that sense. Again, I talked about how water continues to compete with other sectors, and some of those sectors could be more profitable physically in the short term than agriculture, for example, energy. I think issues of corruption, one of the biggest corruptions have actually been in the water sector, usually because of the large infrastructure projects that are there. Issues around social adherence to social safety and safeguards has been an issue where these developments are being designed and implemented. But again, the need for us to ensure that we focus we have Africa-focused research, because most of the research is actually not our own, and yet we're implementing on the same. And I think that was picked up by IPCC. Last slide. So in terms of the recommendations, I think, again, climate uncertainty means that we need to be very intentional in our investment in agricultural water, and this has to be aligned with respective scenarios in different countries. Again, the question is, do we need water or do we need rain? And I think that's a critical question that some of the panelists were asking. What do we do, for example, with groundwater? We need to stimulate private sector participation, again, ensuring that we have environmental and social safeguards as we do that. We also need to look at some of the forgotten or abandoned technologies that could actually help us in this respect, but for some reason we have not really exploited them, and one of them is biotechnology, and later on I'll be expanding on that. A need for us to enhance research and development in climate smart technologies, but more importantly as well, to ensure that that research is national based so that it speaks to the national situation, and also increasing irrigation investment from the current 7% of arable land to around maybe 30%, 38% that is there in Asia. Again, the question is, can we, for example, when it comes to water for agriculture, secure that investment just like other sectors have done in nutrition, where they have a bit of the nutrition secured for nutrition work? Can we also do the same for agriculture, and whether that would also make a difference? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chinoku. So I think highlighting again some insights in terms of water governance in the continent. I think it's interesting to compare the 7% investment in Africa compared to 38% in Asia. So I think it's one of the issues that may come up in further discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chinoku. The last speaker for this session, before we go into the interactive part of the session and conclude, it's Dr. Mure Agbonlaho. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. He is the Senior Agricultural Production and Marketing Officer at the African Union Commission. I think the rest of the CV is available on request. So over to you, Dr. Mure.
Thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon, distinguished colleagues and experts in the room. I don't have a presentation, but I want you to focus on me instead of focus on the screen. Focusing on me also is focusing on Africa, because I'm representing the AU Commission. The intervention I have this afternoon is very brief. The issue has been flogged and overflogged in terms of the challenges of agricultural development in the continent. The issue of increasing episodes of hunger is here with us. Statistically, we are told that there are about 293 million people in the continent that are presently living under hunger. In terms of the food import bill, about $55 billion is spent annually in the continent in importing food. And I'm happy that my colleague from the World Food Program is here also. Well, these are challenges, but as we have also been exhorted this morning that we should not focus on challenge, but let's look at the solutions. So we want to address what at the Commission level, AU Commission, what we are doing to address these issues. The dialogue we are having in the next 3 days is on transitioning to climate resilient system. And it is good that as we transition, as we need to look at how we innovate. Our innovation must be resilient, must be inclusive. Now, at the Commission level, I was happy when my colleague here, in his presentation, I saw CADEP. And I don't know how many of us here have heard of CADEP, the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program. How many of us have heard of CADEP? Okay, maybe about 10% of the room. So it shows that we are not really pushing our CADEP. CADEP is the blueprint for agricultural development in the continent, and it is what gives us the momentum to move and also guide our direction. Now, at the Commission level, what we are known for is for advocacy. Let me say this, that African Union Commission don't have a particular project in any country. You will not see a borehole or an irrigation scheme or a tractor in country A, country B, that this belongs to African Union Commission. What we do is support the members of the countries or the regional economic communities to deliver on what has been agreed on, what they have agreed on. So I was referring us to CADEP because the CADEP is the pillar for agricultural development in the continent. In CADEP, we have the 55 countries in the continent where they made a commitment on how to take the continent forward in terms of agricultural development. And the issue of climate resilient system is key on the CADEP agenda. Now, I said the first thing we do is advocacy. we advocate by encouraging member states to mainstream technologies, to harmonize policies in such a way as to enhance actual productivity in the continent. The issue of gender mainstreaming, the issue of mainstreaming climate resilient system is key on the advocacy agenda of the African Union Commission. Also, what we do as part of the solution to the challenges is capacity building. Now, we don't take a specific country problem and develop capacities on it. We look at common capacity challenge that exists in the continent, and we then look for providers or international partners that can help to build the capacities of member states. It's all about bridging the gaps that exist. Capacities on, let me give an example, a very good example. Morocco, for example, a good example, is doing a lot of work on desalination of seawater for irrigation. Now we find out that they are doing this at a very cheap, it's very cheap, and they have the technology for doing this. So why not encourage other African countries that are littoral to also look at what Morocco is doing in terms of desalination of seawater, and we have been doing that in the past 4 years. Also, in terms of irrigation capacity, we organize yearly training for young irrigation experts in the continent on different irrigation challenges, especially as it affects the issue of water productivity and use of small irrigation schemes. So we are doing that as part of the solution to the issue of capacity gap that exists in the continent. Then at the commission level, we also support the regional economic communities and the member states in mainstreaming climate resilient production technology into their food system. This is a Herculean task because as you are all aware, the states or the member states are sovereign states. So getting them to do what you want them to do, even if it is something that has been proven to be very efficient, is quite difficult. But we are pulling on it. What is helping us, the binary review, I don't know how many of you have heard of the binary review also. Every 2 years, the African Union Commission, we track progress made by member states in terms of the commitments they have made. So like for irrigation that was also presented, I saw that there on irrigation water use. So not just for irrigation also, we also look at the issue of youth involvement in agriculture. We look at the number of women that have access to farmland. So we track member states' progress in this. Apart from tracking, it's not just to track and say, okay, this is doing fine or not doing fine. It is also an opportunity to peer learn for peer learning among countries. So if we find out that there is something that Rwanda is doing very well, for example, in terms of women access to farmland, then this is something we can also push other countries to emulate and incorporate in their food system. So apart from just the tracking of progress, we also recommend what countries that are lagging behind, what they need to do to be able to come up and take the lead. So these are some of the things we do in response to the issue of agricultural development in the continent. Like I said, at the AU level, we look at what member states have agreed, what they are doing, and see who is doing well and who is not doing well, and we'll see how we can scale some of these practices. Now, the issue of peer learning is also key. It is a way of also creating that integration in the continent. We send scientists to countries to look at what they are doing, and they copy from those countries, and they go back to their countries to implement these things. So it is not just go and learn, but also go and implement. Then we also track what you are doing over time in terms of implementation of what have been learned. So these are some of the few things I will just highlight here that we are doing at the Commission level. Like I said, AU it's a continental body of 55 member states. So it's a big organization. So we look at what countries are doing in terms of climate resilience system. So I'll stop here for now, and I think I've saved enough time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mure. I think it's encouraging to learn that the AU Commission has climate resilience as a key part of its agenda. And thank you for sharing the work that you do in terms of advocacy and promoting the sharing of experiences between the different African countries. Well, now we've come to a time in the program or in this session where we're going to invite questions, and we're going to invite the panelists to interact with the audience and the questions. I just need to check, how do we invite the online participants? Are we going to? Okay, so the participants online are invited to write down their questions, and we're going to try and read them out towards the end and see if we can get the panelists to answer. All right, I'm going to take hands now. I see there's a hand here. Are there any hands? Okay, 1, 2. Right, let's take 3 hands for now. Is there a third hand this side? Oh, there's a third hand. Okay, we'll start here and then there, and then we'll go there. Yes. If we can just ask the colleagues just to introduce themselves as they ask the question, and if possible, say to whom is the question addressed. Thank you.
Very comprehensive speakers and also speech, and also you highlighted most of the challenges you are facing everywhere, and we are not going to talk more about the challenges. But one of the most important comment which about gender, young professional, young in general, and women, and they are not interested for agriculture. And based on our experience during the last 5-6 years, we already have our own young professional forum. And in general, in a quick analysis, I do believe that the majority of our members, they are gender, and they are very active. And the majority of young professionals, they are keen to learn more. And if we are going to look for actions, we have to invest, and I fully trust on their capabilities to help for implement actions. And in this regard, we are all. It is on. We have to do more effort together to support them in general. The second, when we are going to talk about actions, I also, one important point, we have to consider to invest in infrastructure. Because without to have a strong infrastructure, without to have a dynamic management of our structure, we will not be able to face this great challenge, especially for floods, extreme rainfall event, and so on. This is just in general, and I would like to thank you very much.
Thank you so much, panelists, for that insightful discussion. My contribution, I want to draw on perspectives from Uganda, and I want to contribute to water governance aspects. First and foremost, I want to add on the water governance perspectives. Is it okay now? Okay, I want to recognize lack of coordination from the key actors as a very critical issue as far as water governance is concerned. For instance, the food actors in food systems and the actors in the water sector do not seem to speak to each other. From my experience with water governance in Uganda, whenever I have stakeholder meetings and I bring together the Ministry of Water and the Ministry of Agriculture, they speak a different language from the same country. So meaning it has created an impression that actually irrigation and WASH, water and sanitation, are competitors. So, and they tend to be a priority on WASH than irrigation. So I also want to talk about the issue of in irrigation. For instance, Makerere University developed a drip system of irrigation that is very friendly, user-friendly, but scaling out becomes a problem. So meaning that research, policy and practice do not speak to each other. So for us as researchers, we end up publishing our work in high-impact journals and getting promoted, but without impacting farmers. I also want to talk about gender inclusion, gender equity and equality, and especially women taking decisions in water governance as a key hindrance. While women tend to be responsible for water at a household level, they do not take decisions as far as irrigation is concerned. And since they constitute the biggest percentage in smallholder farmers, that becomes a challenge to having a climate-smart agriculture. So I also want to end by talking about building robust institutions and capacity building at a community level. For instance, in Uganda, I'm aware that when it comes to WASH, there are water user committees at village level, but I'm not aware of the committees responsible for irrigation. I submit.
There's one more question or comment. Over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Ludfred Kisoli from Arab University, Tanzania. I just have a quick question from the presentation made by Ms. Mary John Gabriel. And this relates to your experience in South Africa. You've talked of the technology and innovation that is also part and parcel of your activities, and specifically drawing your attention to the use of simple-to-use tools, the chameleon and the wetting front detectors. We have also done quite a bit in Tanzania, and we have also experienced some of the challenges in, of course, not only rolling out this, but also more into scaling out. Now, my question was, how or what do you do as this department from the government perspective to sort of play a role around scaling some of these innovations? Thank you.
Let's take the last one for this round. Behind you.
Thank you very much, all panelists. I'm just wondering, for the last 2 decades, we've been hearing this whenever we meet. Our agriculture is only 10% irrigated, 90% rain-fed. We keep hearing that. But what must we do differently to address it? What? I still keep thinking, when you go to Israel, you go and see how dry it is. But we bring our fruits from there. They have done something. Can we learn from them? What has transformed agriculture in Australia? The guy is there. What should we learn from them to do things differently, so that in another 10 years we don't assemble, we are still at 10% irrigation? Thank you.
Maybe what we can do, let's start with the 2 questions, and then the panelists can also reflect on the comments.
Thank you very much from my colleague from Tanzania. So what we do is we do pilot studies. And we have been lucky enough in terms of the pilot study that the Australians have come on board and expanded some of the areas that we do piloting to. So we did it in 2 provinces, in KZN and in Limpopo, and they expanded it in 3 or 4 others, including the Northwest. So that also helps in terms of the collaboration. But we have strong institutional arrangements. So even if we do pilot some, as I mentioned, if you look at the rainwater harvesting and the greywater harvesting techniques, our sister department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment also take hold of it. So the point of it is in government you form strong institutional arrangements that certain of the partners that are involved in water, including your social department that deals with schools, your education department that deals with schools, your social department that deals with communities, they could actually, that is where we do the shared collaboration and shared investment in these initiatives. So that would be my recommendation. Sir, regarding the area of the 10%, it's not just the area of 10% that irrigation contributes to, it's how much percentage in production does it give. In South Africa, only 1.5% of our land is irrigated, but our contribution to production is 30%. I don't have the financial aspects of how much of that is exported, because our wines are exported and they are irrigated. Our fruit is exported and that is irrigated. Our vegetables is also irrigated and that is exported. So it's the contribution of that proportion that is under irrigation that you should be thinking of, and not just the percentage of area that is under irrigation. Thank you.
Let's get the Australian colleagues to add on the scaling up and scaling out. What has Australia been able to do successfully in that area? And then you can expand on the question about the 10% and taking it higher.
I mean, Australia has a long history of investing in irrigation and made an awful lot of mistakes where some areas have been abandoned, other areas have required enormous government subsidies to keep functioning, and it's taken Australia decades upon decades to get to a state where the irrigation systems are commercially viable and self-sustaining and using water in a moderately efficient way. And so this isn't a quick process. I think it is a mistake to focus on the area of hectares under irrigation. It's much more important to focus on how well that command area is farmed and to do it more intensively. I think it's a mistake to focus on the amount of investment in irrigation infrastructure because an awful lot of the infrastructure that has been built, including in Africa, isn't well managed. And so we have seen in a number of African countries government policies that result in the failure of that infrastructure. If you order farmers to grow staple grain crops that are not very profitable and the farmers can't pay the fees that are needed to maintain the infrastructure, that's a wasted investment. And in place after place in Africa, we see a lot of money spent on very expensive infrastructure, very little money spent on understanding how that infrastructure will be used, the infrastructure degrading because it's not maintained, only for a donor to come and build it again. And that's a cycle that collectively we have to break.
I just follow up on what Jamie said. We just took our African colleagues here to see irrigation in Australia. And I think what was interesting there is that we could see that irrigation in Australia also started as small scale. And it then over I would even say, decades, many decades, it consolidated into larger and larger unit, and it became more and more productive. So we looked at a lot of value adding, and we saw a lot of thriving Australian communities that thrived because of value adding. We spoke to a councillor in a local community that said, but we are actually not that much job created by agriculture as industry. But she's wrong. That industry wouldn't be there if it wasn't for agriculture, right? So it was packing sheds, it was canola oil manufacturing, etc., etc. But I think when we in Africa want to learn from what happened in Australia, we also have to understand that Africa is not Australia. So we have to gear these value adding to the African conditions. We can't go wholesale. We are not going to build a new canola manufacturing plant that costs hundreds of millions of dollars somewhere in remote Zimbabwe. It's not going to work. The challenge really for us is to find out how do we do this value adding in the local communities at a much smaller scale so that these value adding can create more jobs. We need economic development, we need activity, we need jobs. We need jobs for people in the local communities. And that is the critical aspect of getting irrigation built. What we have seen in TISA is that once farmers experienced that irrigation was profitable, you should see how quickly they themselves organized to clean their canals, to build fences around their canals, because then the cattle didn't go into it and destroy it, because they have experienced that they made money. So now water is valuable, so we are willing to put the effort in that makes for secure water supply, to clean the canals. The issue is how do we make things profitable? And that's also when it comes to food security, there are two aspects, physical aspect and economic aspect. So we can produce the food we eat, or we can make money from the food we produce, so we can buy what we need. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think on the question around what can we do to increase our irrigation, I just feel like maybe one of the things we need to do is to leapfrog our agriculture policy, really start to do things differently. I see that quite a lot in my own country, where there is several studies that have happened in a flood-prone area, and these studies have pointed out that you could actually get more out of the agricultural sector investment in those areas if, for example, you prioritized winter cropping other than rain-fed agriculture. But then we see every year government continues to give subsidy for rain-fed agriculture. So I think at some point we need to confront this question. We just need to radicalize the agricultural policy investment in that sense. And maybe in other countries there are different scenarios of the same kind. I think we need to change things. The climate is never the same, and therefore we need to start doing things differently. The question on youth, yes, we have very few youths in agriculture, but I can also point out to the fact that I've seen a lot of youths now embracing agriculture. Using modern technologies, going into agriculture in different value chains. The question that I've had is, how are we using national investment through budget to leverage on this interest? Because that interest is real, and that is the future. So really ensuring that we pick on those few youths in different countries that are showing interest in agriculture and get them supported through national policy or investment through national budget. That would be the way to go, I think. I think a question around the coordination challenges, I would say that at least my Ugandan colleague, you saw that coordination challenge between Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Water. I've personally seen that, for example, in one ministry where one ministry has different regulations between sectors. And you can imagine Ministry of Agriculture contradicting itself. So I think there's need for a lot of dialogue at that level, where we have different regulations now to start to speak to each other. Otherwise, I think there's a bit of chaos that needs to be addressed.
Thanks so much. Dr. Matilda, and then...
Yes, I want to contribute on the upscaling and outscaling of irrigation, particularly with reference to the... Okay, sorry. particularly with reference to the country where I come from, Cameroon, where the study was done. Irrigation, it's far-fetched. It's far-fetched there. The rural communities are mainly depending on rain-fed agriculture. And partly the reason is because of the scale at which they are cultivating at very low scale, as I mentioned in my presentation, which implies that it's just impossible for them to invest on irrigation systems, unlike the rich farmers here in South Africa and other places. So in this circumstance, I think they require the government's intervention if they need to have alternate sources of water for the irrigation of the farms. They need government intervention. So I don't know what the AU is doing in this regard to ensure that there should be an outscale of irrigation practices across Africa. Unfortunately, as a result of the fact that they are unable to irrigate their farms, it pushes them to cultivate around the wetland areas, which has serious consequences in terms of pollution because of the chemicals they use on the farms, the fertilizers, causing serious pollutions on water resources. So this is a serious concern. Thank you.
Yeah, I should stand up also. Yeah, thank you very much. I will just speak to the issue of the 10% that my colleague raised here. But if you look at that 10%, sincerely, I believe at the continent level, we are not at 10% irrigation. Sincerely, I believe that. And let me tell you the reason. Now, if you look at that component of 10%, good, I know we are low. But if you look at that 10%, it's mainly the large-scale irrigation schemes that are accounted for. You know, the way we started in the continent was this irrigation was like a public investment program. It's more social. The government just, let's give them this. The farmers are put together to manage those very big schemes. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the financial resources to manage. They don't have even the training to do that. So that's why you have a lot of scheme failure in the continent, especially in the 60s, in the 70s and the 80s. So most of these large-scale schemes, they were not sustainable. Many of them were operating below capacity, 20%. You see a large-scale irrigation schemes that was supposed to serve maybe 50 hectares is doing less than 10 hectares. So that was, now in the last 10 years or thereabout, there is this rapid growth of the farmer-led irrigation schemes, these small irrigation schemes. Everywhere you go in the continent, anytime I travel, you'll find out that the farmers are doing it. And like my colleague said, if it is profitable, the farmer will go into it. If they know that putting water in crop production will give them more, they will go into it. So let's not just, good, I know we are still low in the continent level, but I don't think I'm sure we are up to 20%, not 10%, but we are still low. Now, in terms of what the AU is doing also, in my speech, I skipped this. The African Union Commission, we also produce a framework and guidelines. The Commission has produced a framework for irrigation development and agricultural management in the continent. Now, in that particular framework, there are suites of irrigation practices that member state countries now, they can pick from based on their peculiarities in terms of technical peculiarity, financial peculiarities. So there is if it is rainwater harvesting, if you find out that you have rain, you can't preach rainwater harvesting to a country like Egypt, where they don't have the rain. So there are suites of what agricultural management system that the countries can use. But also, apart from just specifying these suits, there are also the technical requirement, the political requirement, the institutional requirement that you need for these schemes to work. So in the framework, we already have that. And it is for member states to look at their peculiarity and say, okay, we have a lot of, let's say, wastewater management issues. So we can actually convert this wastewater to irrigation water. You understand? So the countries can do that, like I talked about the desalination project in Morocco also. Morocco, they have the seawater with a lot of salt. They don't have fresh water, but how can we also use this for irrigation? And they are doing that. So good, we are still low. I quite agree with you, but we are not at 10%. I must tell you that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe we can take one question from the the last presenter indicated desalination project for irrigation in Morocco and its affordability. What are the cost implications and is it sustainable? I think that there was an indication about that. Was it from?
Yeah, thank you. The desalination program, I don't know. That was a question we asked also. In terms of how sustainable, in terms of how profitable it is. You are taking salt water, you remove the salt and use the water for irrigation. I know in most of the Middle East countries where they have this issue, after desalination, it's normally for potable water, for drinking water. But Morocco has a very big project. In fact, even also there's also the environmental concern. How do you handle the salt? After desalination, how do you handle the salt? Are you not creating another environmental? But they are using solar energy for the process. It's still under. We are cautious about it in recommending it to member states. If you don't have the technical know-how, it may be a very big project for you to do. But that they are doing it shows that it is profitable and it is sustainable. Yes, thank you.
I think we need to close now due to time, but I think there's a question from online which we're going to use as a concluding kind of question, and I'm going to ask all the panelists just in 1 minute, just to close on this one. It says most written policies are unimplemented by government institutions who are supposed to be at the forefront of implementing these, especially policies linked to water, agriculture, and environment. What do we do, to move away from this policy, forever making policies, while we know that we've had quite a lot of challenges and shortcomings in terms of implementing what we already have. And maybe in 1 minute, each panelist can just reflect on that, and then we can close. Start this side.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I think that gap between the policy and implementation, the lack of political will is key here. We always say that we are not short of policies, but implementation is the key, is the challenge. I think it's lack of political will. We face this challenge. We face this challenge in Africa. You have a very beautiful project, very beautiful intervention you are putting to member states, and they will tell you, good is very beautiful. We know we need this, but this is not our priority for this year. So I think it's the political will that is absent. It's not your priority for this year. When will it be your priority? I don't say no. Security is our challenge now, or maybe education is our challenge. So I think I will hinge it on lack of political will. If we have that government buying, let them know that this yes, development is all inclusive. It's all inclusive. If the government really take it as this is mine, and it's going to benefit the people, so they will support it. Thank you.
In my view, we need more radical approaches. Some of our governments only listen to radical measures. We have campaigns in different areas, gender-based violence and so on. Why can't we also have that pressure group rising up and mounting pressure on government to do something? Thank you.
Okay. From government, what we have is we have the financial power, with the powerhouse of finance. So in terms of research, we ensure that certain things are targeted. We want 50% of the women to be involved in irrigated. That must be targeted. In terms of research, write it down in your contract with research institutions that this need to be implemented. So actually, even if you are not actually doing the implementation, your agency is doing the implementation. And lastly, form very strong institutional collaboration in terms of how it's going to be rolled out. Contact your colleagues. I don't need to be in conflict with the people in DWS. They need to fund the bulk infrastructure and I need to use the water. And the only way for us to do it is to work together in terms of that. So it depends on you first and then the policies that you make. Thank you.
In the Transforming Irrigation in Southern Africa project, we've been focused on empowering the farmers to transform from subsistence agriculture to highly profitable agriculture. And what that has done is it's forced the governments to change. It's forced the governments to change because the farmers and the private sector are doing their thing outside of government, and they're more powerful in their voice telling government where their policies need to change and be better implemented. And in many cases it's shown the governments where their policies are the hindrance that needs to change. And as a result, we've seen a number of key changes on the ground. Mandates to grow only staple food crops have been dropped in some places so that farmers can grow the most profitable crops. We've seen governments say we need to improve our understanding of who owns which piece of irrigation infrastructure, where the income is going to come from to pay for its maintenance so the system's sustainable. And it's those sorts of changes that we think can be driven by empowering farmers from the bottom up.
Yeah. So I think policy is just an intent. It's an intention. It's a desire that we have in terms of where we want to get. I think as long as that policy pronouncement is not accompanied by investment, it's just rhetoric. So for me, it doesn't matter what a politician says. It doesn't matter what any institution, for example, says they're going to do. I'm only going to take them seriously the moment they put money to it. So let's focus on how are we investing on the political pronouncements that are being made, especially if they come through our national budget.
Thank you very much. Jamie stole most of my thunder. But I think policy is important, and it's important that policymakers, I think, are more willing to listen to the policies that are really needed, and they have to take more the farmer's position into consideration, so that policies are directed toward improving the conditions of the farmers and their communities, and not necessarily only needing national goals, such as delivering stable food. But I might want to use a part of my 1 minute to change the direction, because African governments in reality can only do that much. We are actually in the pocket of a lot of global policies directly from the global north. That means that there are a lot of policies we can't introduce. We cannot make decisions about our subsidies, about our tariffs, about a number of other things, because they are controlled by global institutions. The global institutions allow global oil companies to dump chicken, sugar, skim milk powder, and everything else. So if somebody in Kenya or in Tanzania wants to increase milk production, they are competing with cheap milk powder that Danish companies, I'm afraid to say, so they have already skipped milk powder because they produce butter and cheeses. So they want to sell it as fat, as a high fat concept. So that's like palm oil and adding to the skim milk, and then they're dumping that cheaply in Africa as full cream milk that women buy to give their children because they need animal protein. So what they're actually buying is not animal protein. And these issues are actually maybe also the elephant in the room, if I might use your term, because we don't really want to talk about. And in a sense, we also don't have the power to talk about it or do anything about it. But I think this is the elephant in the room, really.
Thank you so much. I think we would have loved to take more questions, but we're out of time. And I think we more likely that the panel did
a wonderful job. Can we give them a round? I'm now going to hand over to the host, to tell us what we're going to do next. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that session. We are going to take a break now we are going to take a break now to go for lunch. It's I think it's like 1:12. We're supposed to come back from lunch at 2 o'clock so that we don't lose time on any of our sessions. So please do try to eat quickly as you chat so that we come back for session number 3. We understand that there are some colleagues that arrived this morning and have not had an opportunity to check in and that they are walking around with their luggage. We have arranged for storage, so if you could please give the ladies at the registration desk, they can relieve you of your luggage until at the end of the day when you will be able to go to your room. We also would like anyone with sort of special dietary requirements, because we didn't sort of get the information from the catering services on time, so they are asking that if there are any people with special dietary requirements, if you could please note that with the ladies at the registration desk, so that they can prepare the meals accordingly. So let's enjoy the break, let's network, let's visit the exhibition store, and we come back at 2 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.